Jake Morrison stared at the massive screens in the Earth Defense Force Command Center. 3 months ago, he thought first contact with aliens would be the greatest moment in human history. Now he watched their ships floating over every major city on Earth like dark clouds bringing death. The Zephyrians had arrived with fanfare and promises of peace. Their ships were beautiful, gleaming silver vessels that looked like works of art against the blue sky. Their ambassadors spoke perfect English and claimed they wanted to share knowledge with humanity. World leaders rolled out red carpets and, through grand ceremonies, Jake remembered the excitement in those early days. Dr. Lisa Carter had been chosen as part of the welcome committee. She was a smart woman who studied alien life, though she had never expected to meet any. Lisa spent weeks talking with the Zephyrian diplomats, learning about their culture and technology. The aliens seemed friendly enough, asking many questions about human society and military capabilities. But something felt wrong to Jake from the beginning. The aliens asked too many specific questions about weapons and defense systems. They wanted detailed maps of military bases and population centers. When Jake raised concerns with his superiors, they told him to stay quiet. This was diplomacy. They said the aliens were just being thorough. Lisa noticed things too. The Zephyrians always traveled in groups and never let humans examine their technology closely. They claimed their ships were too dangerous for human visitors, but Lisa suspected they were hiding something. When she tried to study samples of Zephyrian materials, the aliens politely but firmly refused. The truth came out 3 weeks ago, when a junior communications officer named Ben Torres accidentally intercepted an alien transmission. The message was not encrypted because the Zephyrians assumed humans could not understand their language. Ben was smart with computers and had been working on translation programs. What he decoded made his blood run cold. The Zephyrians were not interested in peaceful cooperation. They saw humans as primitive animals suitable only for slave labor. Their home empire had conquered 17 other star systems using the same approach. First, they would arrive as peaceful diplomats. Then they would study the local species and their defenses. Finally, they would strike without warning and enslave whoever survived. Jake rushed the intelligence to his commanding officers, but it was too late. The alien ships were already in position over major cities. When confronted with the evidence, the Zephyrian ambassador simply smiled and said the invasion would begin at dawn. The aliens were massive creatures, standing over 8 feet tall with thick shells covering their bodies like armor. Their faces looked almost human, but with large black eyes and sharp teeth. They carried weapons that fired beams of pure energy, capable of cutting through steel like paper. Most terrifying of all, they showed no emotion when killing humans. To them, people were just obstacles to be removed. The attack started in New York City at exactly 6 in the morning. Giant transport ships descended from the main vessels, carrying thousands of Zephyrian soldiers. The creatures moved with military precision, securing key buildings and infrastructure within hours. Human police and military units fought bravely, but their bullets barely scratched the aliens. Natural armor. Lisa watched the news reports from her laboratory in Washington, D.C. The footage was horrifying. Zephyrian soldiers walked through the streets, shooting anyone who ran or fought back. They set up checkpoints on every corner and began separating people into groups. The strong and healthy were marked with blue paint on their foreheads. The old, sick, and very young received red marks. Nobody knew what the colors meant at first, but it became clear soon enough. The blue-marked humans were loaded onto transport vehicles and taken to processing centers. The red-marked ones were simply executed on the spot. Families were torn apart as parents were separated from children and spouses from each other. The same scene played out in London, Tokyo, Moscow, and dozens of other cities around the world. Human governments tried to organize resistance, but the aliens had studied their command structures too well. Key military leaders were captured or killed in the first hours of the invasion. Communication networks were jammed or destroyed. Whole armies found themselves cut off and surrounded. Jake's command center in Colorado Springs was one of the few military installations still operating after the first day. The mountains provided some protection from the alien sensors, but he knew it was only a matter of time before they were discovered. His staff worked frantically to coordinate with surviving units across North America, but the reports were all the same. Overwhelming defeat and massive casualties. Dr. Amy Rodriguez, a psychologist assigned to Jake's unit, studied the alien tactics and found them coldly efficient. The Zephyrians were not just conquering Earth, they were breaking human spirit. By separating families and executing the weak in public, they sent a clear message. Resistance would only lead to more suffering. In the captured cities, the aliens established what they called cooperation centers. These were former sports stadiums and convention halls where humans were processed like cattle. Commander Zektar, the alien military governor, gave daily broadcasts explaining the new order. Humans who accepted their fate and worked hard would be treated well. Those who caused trouble would be eliminated along with their families. The broadcasts showed groups of humans being loaded onto massive transport ships. Commander Zektar explained that these workers were being taken to other worlds in the Zephyrian Empire where they would help build new colonies. He made it sound like an honor, a chance for humans to see the galaxy and serve a greater purpose. But Lisa had intercepted more alien communications. She knew the truth about these work assignments. The humans were being sent to mining planets with poisonous atmospheres and extreme temperatures. Few would survive more than a year in such conditions. It was slavery disguised as opportunity. Underground resistance groups began forming in the occupied cities. People like Tony Phillips, a mechanic from Detroit, and Karen Scott, a teacher from Seattle, organized networks to help families hide from alien patrols. They used subway tunnels, abandoned buildings, and hidden basements to move people around the cities without being detected. But the aliens were smart and patient. They offered rewards to humans who turned in hidden survivors. Food was scarce in the occupied zones, and desperate people sometimes betrayed their neighbors for a chance to eat. Trust became a luxury that few could afford. The breaking point came 6 weeks after the invasion began. A group of refugees had gathered in an old warehouse outside Denver, hoping to escape to the mountains. There were nearly 8,000 people packed into the building, including hundreds of children and elderly who could not travel far. Someone betrayed their location to the aliens. Commander Zektar decided to make an example that would end all thoughts of resistance. The Zephyrian ships surrounded the warehouse and demanded surrender. When the humans refused to come out, the aliens simply destroyed the entire building with energy weapons. Jake watched the satellite footage of the massacre with growing rage. The warehouse burned for 3 days, and the aliens prevented rescue workers from reaching any survivors. They broadcast images of the destruction to every remaining human settlement with a simple message. This is what happens to those who resist. But something else happened that day. Instead of breaking human spirit, the Denver massacre awakened something darker in the survivors. Jake saw it in the faces of his staff. Lisa noticed it in the tone of resistance communications. Amy documented it in her psychological reports. The humans who remained were no longer the same species that had welcomed the aliens with open arms. 3 months ago, they had learned what the Zephyrians truly were, and they were beginning to understand what they themselves might need to become to survive. The war was about to change, though nobody yet realized how dark that change would be. 6 weeks after the Denver massacre, Colonel Ryan Martinez crawled through the rubble that used to be downtown San Francisco. The beautiful city by the bay was now a graveyard of twisted metal and broken concrete. Alien patrol ships, hummed overhead. Like giant metal insects, their sensors sweeping the ruins for any sign of human life. Ryan led what remained of the Pacific Defense Coalition from a hidden bunker 3 levels beneath the destroyed federal building. His army had shrunk from 50,000 soldiers to less than 3,000 survivors. Most of his equipment was damaged or destroyed, and ammunition was running dangerously low. The men and women under his command looked like ghosts, there, eyes hollow from weeks of constant fear and loss. The Zephyrians had turned the war into something worse than conquest. It was extermination disguised as organization. In every captured city, the aliens built what they called processing centers. These were massive concrete buildings surrounded by electric fences and guard towers. Humans were brought here by the thousands to be sorted like pieces of cargo. Dr. Amy Rodriguez had been documenting the alien methods since the invasion began. She hid in the ruins with a small team, studying how the Zephyrians broke down human society piece by piece. Amy watched through stolen alien surveillance equipment as families were torn apart at the processing centers. Children were separated from parents and loaded onto different transport ships. Husbands and wives were divided based on their physical condition and work potential. The aliens had a simple system for deciding who lived and who died. The strong and healthy received blue marks and were sent to labor camps on distant worlds. The weak, old, or sick received red marks and were executed immediately. But there was a third category that made Amy's blood run cold. Young children received yellow marks and were taken to special facilities for what the aliens called behavioral adjustment. These children were being raised to serve the Zephyrian Empire without question. They were taught that humans were an inferior species that had been saved by alien intervention. The kids learned to speak the Zephyrian language and follow alien customs. Within a few years, they would become perfect servants who believed their enslavement was actually freedom. Commander Zektar, the alien military governor, appeared on television screens throughout the occupied zones every day at noon. The massive creature stood behind a podium wearing what looked like a military uniform covered in strange symbols. His voice was deep and mechanical when he spoke English, but his message was always the same. Humans of Earth, he would begin, his black eyes staring directly into the camera. The Zephyrian Empire offers you purpose and meaning. Your old governments failed you with their wars and pollution. We provide order and direction. Those who accept their role in our great civilization will find peace. Those who resist will find only suffering. Behind Zektar's words was the constant threat of more Bender massacres. The aliens had destroyed 12 other refugee camps since then, each time broadcasting the footage to show what happened to those who tried to hide. The message was clear: submit or die. But resistance continued in small pockets around the world. Tony Phillips, the mechanic from Detroit, had organized an underground network that used the city's abandoned subway tunnels to move people without being detected. His group had saved over 200 families from the processing centers, helping them escape to hidden camps in the Michigan wilderness. Tony learned to move like a ghost through the ruins of his city. He knew every maintenance tunnel, every broken sewer pipe, and every collapsed building that could provide shelter. The aliens were powerful, but they did not understand human cities the way someone who had lived there all his life could understand them. Karen Scott, the teacher from Seattle, had taken a different approach to resistance. She organized groups of survivors to gather intelligence about alien operations. Karen and her people would watch the processing centers from hidden positions, documenting guard schedules and transport routes. The information was passed to other resistance cells through a network of coded radio messages. Karen had seen things that gave her nightmares. She watched through binoculars as alien guards forced human prisoners to fight each other for entertainment. The winner would receive extra food while the loser was beaten unconscious. She saw children torn from their mothers' arms, while the women screamed and begged. She witnessed public executions, where humans were killed slowly to terrorize the watching. Crowds. The aliens seemed to enjoy human suffering in ways that went beyond simple military necessity. Karen realized that the Zephyrians were not just conquering Earth for resources or territory. They were doing it because they liked having power over other living beings. The cruelty was the point. Jake Morrison continued to coordinate resistance efforts from his hidden command center in Colorado. His communications equipment could still reach other surviving military units, but the reports he received were always the same. Heavy casualties, dwindling supplies, and growing desperation among the survivors. One message particularly disturbed Jake. It came from Captain Sandra Lewis, who was hiding with a small group of soldiers in the ruins of Chicago. Sandra reported that some humans in the occupied zones were beginning to collaborate with the aliens willingly. These people helped identify resistance members in exchange for better treatment and extra food rations. The collaborators wore special green armbands that marked them as cooperative citizens. They were given small amounts of authority over other humans and used this power to settle old grudges or gain personal advantage. Some of them seemed to genuinely believe that working with the aliens was the smart choice for humanity's future. But Sandra also reported something else that worried Jake even more. Some resistance fighters were starting to change in disturbing ways. The constant exposure to alien brutality was making them brutal in return. Sandra had witnessed human fighters torturing captured alien soldiers for information, using methods that would have horrified them before the invasion. Dr. Lisa Carter continued her research from a hidden laboratory beneath the ruins of Washington, D.C. She had been studying captured alien technology and biology, trying to find weaknesses that could be exploited. What she discovered made her realize that humans were fighting an enemy they barely understood. The Zephyrians were not just physically powerful. They were psychologically adapted for conquest and domination. Their brain structure showed enlarged areas associated with aggression and reduced areas linked to empathy. They literally could not understand concepts like mercy or compassion the way humans did. But Lisa also discovered something else in her research. The aliens had one significant weakness that they probably did not realize humans could exploit. Their immune systems were adapted to their home world's environment and had never been exposed to Earth's biological agents. With the right knowledge and equipment, it might be possible to create weapons that could kill Zephyrians while leaving humans unharmed. The problem was that developing such weapons would require resources and facilities that the Resistance did not have. It would also require a level of scientific knowledge that pushed the boundaries of everything Lisa understood about biology and genetics. Most troubling of all, it would require human fighters to become the kind of people who could use biological weapons without hesitation. Amy Rodriguez documented all of these developments in her psychological reports. She could see that the humans who survived the first months of occupation were changing in fundamental ways. The gentle qualities that had once defined human civilization were being stripped away by necessity and replaced with something harder and colder. The people who emerged from the ruins each day to search for food and supplies were not the same species that had welcomed the aliens with hope and curiosity. They were becoming something new, shaped by violence and loss into creatures that could match their enemies' capacity for cruelty. Amy realized that even if humanity somehow won this war, the victory would come at a price that might destroy everything that had made them human in the first place. The aliens were not just conquering Earth's cities and resources. They were conquering human souls, turning their victims into reflections of themselves. The Resistance was about to learn that sometimes the only way to defeat monsters was to become monsters in return. 3 months after the Denver massacre, Lieutenant Ben Torres sat in a dark basement beneath the ruins of Chicago, staring at plans that would have horrified him just a year ago. The young communications officer, who had once taught military ethics to new recruits, was now designing weapons that could kill thousands of alien soldiers in the most painful way possible. Ben had changed like everyone else who survived the occupation. The gentle man who used to debate the moral rules of warfare now spent his days figuring out how to break every rule he had ever believed in. The aliens had taught humans a simple lesson. In a war for survival, morality was a luxury that got you killed. The breakthrough came when Dr. Lisa Carter managed to analyze tissue samples from dead Zephyrian soldiers. Working in her hidden laboratory with equipment salvaged from destroyed universities, Lisa discovered that the aliens had a fatal weakness. Their respiratory systems were completely different from human lungs and could not filter certain types of airborne particles. Lisa explained her findings to Ben during a secret meeting in the Chicago underground. The aliens breathed through small holes along their necks that connected directly to their bloodstream. If the right kind of microscopic poison could be introduced into their air supply, it would kill them within minutes, while having no effect on humans. "We can make them suffer the way they made us suffer," Lisa said, her voice cold and emotionless. The woman who had once advocated for peaceful contact with alien species now spoke about genocide like she was discussing the weather. "We can create a virus that attacks their nervous system. They will die slowly and in terrible pain." Ben nodded and began working on delivery systems for Lisa's biological weapons. He designed small devices that could be hidden in air vents or water supplies. In alien-occupied buildings, the devices would release the poisonous particles gradually, ensuring maximum exposure before the aliens realized what was happening. But biological weapons were just one part of the new human strategy Captain Sandra Lewis had been developing. A network of infiltrators who could get close to high-ranking alien officers. These volunteers underwent painful surgical procedures to alter their appearance and make them look more submissive and broken. Sandra called them ghost agents because they had to kill their old identities completely. These men and women learned to act like perfect slaves, accepting beatings and humiliation without complaint. They worked in alien facilities as janitors, food servers, and maintenance workers while secretly gathering intelligence and planting weapons. The ghost agents sacrificed everything that made them human individuals. They could never return to their families or old lives because their psychological conditioning had to be so complete that even they believed their cover stories. Sandra recruited people who had already lost everything to the occupation, volunteers, who welcomed the chance to erase their painful memories along with their identities. Meanwhile, Ryan Martinez had transformed his remaining soldiers into something that resembled a military unit but operated like a pack of predators, his fighters, no longer bothered with traditional tactics like holding territory or protecting civilians. Instead, they focused entirely on killing aliens in ways that would terrorize the survivors. Ryan's teams learned to move through occupied cities like ghosts, striking without warning and disappearing before reinforcements could arrive. But they were not content with simply killing their enemies quickly. The humans had studied Zephyrian culture and discovered that the aliens had deep religious beliefs about death and the afterlife. The Zephyrians believed that their souls could only join their ancestors if their bodies remained intact after death. Dismemberment or mutilation would condemn them to wander alone in darkness forever. Ryan's fighters began leaving mutilated alien corpses as psychological weapons, knowing that other Zephyrians who found them would be traumatized by the sight. Amy Rodriguez documented these changes in her psychological reports, though she wondered if anyone would ever read them. The humans she studied were becoming unrecognizable as the same species that had built art museums and written poetry. They were turning into efficient killing machines, focused entirely on causing maximum damage to their enemies. In New York, Tony Phillips had organized civilian resistance cells that specialized in urban warfare tactics. His people learned to build explosive devices from household chemicals and hide them in places where aliens would never think to look. They disguised bombs as children's toys, medical supplies, and religious items, knowing that curious Zephyrian soldiers would eventually pick them up. Tony's fighters also began targeting alien civilians who worked in administrative roles. The Zephyrian Empire used non-military personnel to manage conquered territories, believing that these administrators would be safe from human attacks. Tony proved them wrong by hunting down every alien bureaucrat he could find and killing them in public places. The psychological warfare escalated when resistance groups began broadcasting their own propaganda to counter Commander Ziktar's daily messages. But instead of appeals for hope or freedom, the human broadcasts showed footage of dead aliens and promised that every Zephyrian on Earth would eventually suffer the same fate. Karen Scott coordinated these propaganda efforts from her hidden base in Seattle. She had become expert at editing video footage to create the most disturbing images possible. Karen would show close-up shots of alien faces, twisted in pain, accompanied by recordings of their dying screams. The broadcasts were designed to make other Zephyrians afraid to leave their secure compounds. But Karen's most effective weapon was her ability to turn the aliens' own tactics against them. She learned that Zephyrian society was built on strict hierarchies and that lower-ranking soldiers feared their superiors more than they feared death. Karen created fake communications that made it appear that high-ranking aliens were planning to abandon their troops on Earth. The fake messages spread panic through alien military units as soldiers began to suspect that they were being sacrificed for political reasons back on the Zephyrian home worlds. Some alien units began fighting each other instead of focusing on human resistance. Exactly as Karen had planned. Jake Morrison watched all of these developments from his command center in Colorado, trying to coordinate what had become less of a resistance movement and more of a campaign of systematic revenge. His communications equipment now carried messages that would have been unthinkable during the early days of the occupation. Resistance leaders discussed poisoning alien food supplies, releasing biological weapons in civilian areas, and using human prisoners as bait to lure aliens into traps. The conversations were conducted in calm, professional tones by people who had once been teachers, doctors, and engineers. War had transformed them into something that their former selves would not have recognized. The change was complete when Jake received a message from a resistance cell in London. The group had captured a Zephyrian transport ship carrying alien families evacuating from Earth. Instead of allowing the non-combatants to leave safely, the humans had killed everyone on board and sent video footage of the massacre to alien military. Commanders. Jake realized that the humans were no longer fighting for freedom or justice, or any of the noble ideals that had once motivated them. They were fighting for revenge, and they had become willing to do anything necessary to achieve it. The species that had created the concept of war crimes was now committing them systematically and without remorse. Dr. Lisa Carter completed her biological weapon 3 weeks later. The virus was more effective than she had hoped, capable of killing Zephyrians within hours of exposure, while spreading through their air recycling systems like wildfire. But Lisa had also made the virus as painful as possible, ensuring that infected aliens would suffer tremendously before dying. As she prepared to distribute the weapon to resistance cells around the world, Lisa reflected on what she had become. The scientist who had once dreamed of learning from alien cultures was now creating tools for genocide. But she felt no guilt or regret about her work. The aliens had taught humans that mercy was weakness, and humanity had learned the lesson. Well, the war was about to enter its final phase. Though neither side yet understood that the real victory would belong to whoever could embrace darkness most completely. 6 months after the invasion began, Jake Morrison stood in his command center watching red dots disappear from the global tracking screen. Each dot represented a Zephian military installation, and they were going dark one by one as Operation Dark Mirror unfolded across 5 continents. The humans were no longer fighting for survival. They were fighting for total extermination. The operation began at exactly midnight, coordinated through encrypted communications that the aliens could not break. In every major city on Earth, resistance cells activated weapons and tactics that violated every rule of warfare humans had ever written. But those rules belonged to a gentler species that no longer existed. In Los Angeles, Gary Chun crouched in a maintenance tunnel beneath the main Zephyrian communication center. A young tech specialist had spent weeks learning alien computer systems by torturing captured technicians until they revealed their passwords and security codes. Gary felt no guilt about the methods he used. The aliens had taught humans that information was more valuable than individual lives. Gary plugged his modified laptop into the alien network and began uploading a virus of his own design. But this was not like the biological weapons that Lisa Carter had created. This virus was designed to attack Zephyrian psychology rather than their bodies. It would flood their communication networks with images and sounds specifically chosen to cause maximum emotional trauma. The virus contained footage of dead alien soldiers arranged in positions that violated Zephyrian religious beliefs. It included recordings of alien civilians begging for mercy before being executed by human fighters. Most disturbing of all, it contained propaganda messages claiming that the Zephyrian Empire had abandoned the invasion force and left them to die on a hostile world. As Gary worked, explosions echoed through the building above him. Other resistance fighters were setting off bombs filled with Lisa's biological weapon. The virus particles would spread through the alien air recycling system within minutes, killing everyone inside while leaving the building intact for human forces to occupy later. 3,000 miles away in New York, Sandra Lewis watched her ghost agents complete their final mission. These surgically altered humans had spent months gaining the trust of alien administrators by accepting abuse and following orders without complaint. Now they were using their access to poison the water supplies of every major Zephyrian facility in the city. Sandra had trained her agents to show no emotion when their alien supervisors began dying in agony. The ghost agents continued working normally, even as Zephyrian soldiers collapsed around them, their respiratory systems shutting down from the biological toxins. When questioned by surviving aliens, the agents claimed ignorance and offered to help find medical assistance. But the ghost agents had also been given a secondary mission that Sandra had not shared with other resistance leaders. They were instructed to capture high-ranking aliens alive and transport them to hidden facilities where specialized interrogation teams were waiting. These teams had learned Zephyrian anatomy well enough to cause maximum pain without allowing their subjects to die. Quickly, the interrogations were not really about gathering intelligence anymore. The humans already knew everything they needed to know about alien military operations. The torture sessions were being recorded and broadcast to other Zephyrian units as psychological warfare. The message was simple. This is what happens when you invade our world. Ryan Martinez led his fighters to the ruins of San Francisco, moving from building to building as they hunted down fleeing alien soldiers. His teams no longer bothered taking prisoners unless they needed subjects for interrogation. Every Zephyrian they encountered was killed immediately, often after being mutilated in ways designed to terrify any aliens who found the bodies later. Ryan carried a special weapon that fired projectiles containing concentrated doses of Lisa's biological virus. The bullets would inject the poison directly into alien bloodstreams, causing death within minutes, but ensuring maximum suffering during those final moments. He had tested the weapon extensively on captured aliens and refined it until the dying process was as painful as possible. His soldiers followed his example, competing to see who could develop the most creative ways to kill their enemies. They learned that certain types of damage to Zephyrian nerve clusters would cause paralysis without immediate death, allowing for extended torture sessions. They discovered that alien young were especially vulnerable to specific toxins that would cause them to die slowly while their parents watched helplessly. The psychological impact of these tactics spread far beyond their immediate targets. Alien soldiers began refusing to leave their fortified positions, even when ordered to do so by their commanders. Some Zephyrian units started shooting at anything that moved, including their own personnel, because they could no longer distinguish between real threats and imagined ones. Commander Zektar broadcast increasingly desperate messages from his command ship in orbit above Earth. A massive alien military governor who had once spoken confidently about human submission now pleaded with resistance leaders to return to civilized warfare. He offered to negotiate prisoner exchanges and establish rules for combat that would protect non-combatants on both sides. But the humans ignored these communications entirely. Amy Rodriguez had studied Zektar's psychological profile and determined that the alien commander was beginning to break under the pressure of losing control. She recommended that resistance leaders continue ignoring his messages while escalating their attacks on alien civilian targets. Tony Phillips coordinated strikes against alien evacuation centers where non-military personnel were trying to escape. Earth. His teams used truck bombs and chemical weapons to kill thousands of Zephyrian families who had never participated in combat operations. Tony justified these attacks by pointing out that the aliens had never shown mercy to human civilians. The resistance had learned to think like their enemies, viewing every alien as a legitimate target regardless of age or military status. Had studied Zephyrian society and discovered that civilian administrators were just as responsible for the occupation as frontline soldiers. Killing alien families would prevent future generations of invaders from being born. Karen Scott expanded her propaganda operations to include live broadcasts of alien executions. Her teams would capture Zephyrian prisoners and force them to confess their crimes against humanity before killing them on camera. The executions were designed to be as humiliating as possible, violating every aspect of alien cultural dignity. But Karen's most effective psychological weapon was her ability to turn alien survivors against each other. She created fake evidence suggesting that certain Zephyrian units had been secretly collaborating with humans in exchange for promises of safe passage off Earth. The false accusations led to internal conflicts within alien military ranks as units began attacking each other instead of focusing on human targets. Dr. Lisa Carter continued refining her biological weapons from her underground laboratory. She had developed new strains of the virus that could remain dormant for weeks before activating, allowing human agents to spread the infection throughout alien populations without immediate detection. She also created versions that would target specific alien age groups, ensuring that young Zephyrians would die differently than adults. Lisa worked with a team of volunteer test subjects who had been captured during alien raids. These Zephyrian prisoners were kept alive specifically for experimentation, allowing Lisa to observe how different virus strains affected alien physiology. The test subjects were never given pain medication or allowed to die quickly, because Lisa needed to document every stage of the infection process. The most horrifying development came when Jake Morrison authorized the use of nuclear weapons as psychological tools rather than strategic ones. Small nuclear devices were detonated near alien positions not to destroy military targets, but to demonstrate human willingness to embrace total destruction. The radiation would make large areas uninhabitable for both species, showing that humans preferred a dead world to an occupied one The nuclear demonstrations had exactly the effect Jake intended. Alien forces began withdrawing from forward positions and concentrating in heavily fortified areas. But this only made them easier targets for biological attacks. As the crowded conditions helped, Lisa's viruses spread more quickly through their populations. As Operation Dark Mirror continued its systematic destruction of Zephyrian forces, the humans realized they had crossed a line from which there was no return. They were no longer the species that had built libraries and hospitals and schools. They had become something new, shaped by war into creatures that could match their enemies' capacity for cruelty and exceed it. The invasion was ending, but victory would come at a price that would haunt humanity forever. The last Zephyrian transport ship lifted off from Earth on a cold morning in March, exactly 8 months after the invasion began. Jake Morrison watched it disappear into the gray sky from the roof of what used to be the United Nations building. In New York, the war was over, but the man who stood watching the alien retreat was not the same person who had defended Earth 8 months ago. Commander Zektar's final broadcast came from his command ship as it prepared to leave Earth's orbit. The massive alien military governor, who had once spoken with confidence about human submission, now sounded broken and defeated. His voice shook as he delivered what amounted to a surrender message to the species he had tried to enslave. "Humans of Earth," Zektar said, his words barely audible through the static of damaged communication equipment. "The Zephyrian Empire withdraws from your world. We came believing you were a primitive species, suitable for labor and service. We were wrong. You are something far more dangerous than we understood." Jake listened to the broadcast, along with resistance leaders scattered across the globe. They had won, but none of them felt like celebrating. The victory had cost them everything. That made them human in the first place. They had saved their world by becoming monsters worse than the Asabri, creatures they had defeated. The final battle had taken place in the Zephyrian Command Center beneath Chicago, where Sandra Lewis led her Ghost agents in a mission to capture the alien regional commander alive. The facility had been designed to withstand nuclear attack, but the aliens had not planned for enemies who could walk among them disguised as broken slaves. Sandra's agents had spent weeks gaining access to the deepest levels of the complex by accepting beatings and torture without complaint. When the moment came, they moved with precision that shocked even Sandra herself. Within minutes, they had control of the facility and its commander, a high-ranking alien named General Victor. Happened next would haunt Sandra for the rest of her life. Her team spent 3 days torturing General Victor while broadcasting the sessions to every remaining Zephyrian unit on Earth. They used techniques specifically designed to cause maximum psychological trauma to alien witnesses, while keeping the victim alive and conscious. The recordings showed General Victor begging for death while human. Interrogators calmly explained each torture method they planned to use. The sessions included detailed descriptions of how humans had learned to exploit Zephyrian anatomy for maximum pain. Most disturbing of all, the interrogators spoke in the same calm, professional tones that the aliens had used when processing human prisoners. The psychological impact of these broadcasts was immediate and devastating. Alien units across the globe began surrendering or abandoning their positions without orders from their superiors. Some Zephyrian soldiers turned their weapons on themselves rather than risk capture by human forces. Others simply disappeared into the wilderness, hoping to hide until evacuation ships could rescue them. Dr. Lisa Carter completed her ultimate biological weapon during the final weeks of the war. Working with tissue samples from captured aliens, she developed a virus that would spread through Zephyrian populations slowly and invisibly, remaining dormant for months before activating with lethal results. The weapon was designed to ensure that any Zephyrian who survived the immediate conflict would eventually die in agony. Lisa had also created a delivery system that would spread the virus to the alien home worlds. Human infiltrators had managed to place infected materials aboard Zephyrian evacuation ships, ensuring that the plague would travel back to the Empire's core systems. Millions of aliens who had never heard of Earth would die because their military had chosen the wrong planet to invade. But Lisa's greatest achievement was also her most horrifying. She had engineered the virus to attack Zephyrian reproductive systems, ensuring that any aliens who initially survived the infection would be unable to produce offspring. Within a generation, the entire Zephyrian species would face extinction because they had tried to enslave humanity. Ryan Martinez led the final assault on the main Zephyrian processing center outside Denver, the same facility where thousands of human prisoners had been tortured and killed. His soldiers moved through the complex like ghosts, killing every alien they encountered without mercy or hesitation. But they also killed the human collaborators who had helped run the facility. Ryan had compiled lists of every human who had cooperated with the occupation forces, from translators who helped interrogate prisoners to guards who had beaten their own species for alien approval. These collaborators were executed alongside their alien masters, often after being forced to watch their families die first. The message was clear to any humans who had considered collaboration during the occupation. Betraying your own species carried consequences that extended beyond individual punishment. Entire bloodlines would be eliminated to ensure that the genetic tendency toward betrayal could never emerge again. Amy Rodriguez continued documenting the transformation of human society even as the war ended. Her psychological reports showed that the species emerging from the conflict was fundamentally different from the one that had welcomed alien visitors 8 months earlier. Concepts like mercy, forgiveness, and compassion had been systematically eliminated from human thinking. The survivors had learned to view violence as the primary solution to any problem. They approached conflicts with a cold calculation that focused entirely on eliminating threats rather than resolving differences peacefully. Most disturbing of all, they seemed incapable of feeling guilt or regret about their actions during the war. Amy realized that humanity had won by becoming something that its former self would have considered evil. The species that had created art and music and literature had transformed into efficient killing machines focused entirely on survival and revenge. They had defeated their enemies by embracing every dark impulse that civilization had once tried to suppress. Tony Phillips organized the cleanup operations in major cities, a process that involved hunting down every remaining alien and human collaborator who might have escaped the initial purges. His teams moved systematically through the ruins, checking every hiding place and questioning every survivor about possible alien sympathizers. The cleanup was conducted with the same methodical efficiency that the aliens had used during their occupation. Suspected collaborators were given summary trials that lasted only minutes before being executed. Their bodies were left in public places as warnings to anyone who might consider showing mercy to surviving aliens or questioning the methods used. To achieve victory, Karen Scott coordinated the final propaganda campaign, which involved broadcasting footage of alien defeats to every corner of the galaxy that human technology could reach. The messages were designed to warn other potential invaders about what happened if they chose Earth as a target. The broadcasts showed graphic footage of alien soldiers dying from biological weapons, recordings of torture sessions with captured commanders, and detailed explanations of how humans had learned to exploit every weakness in Zephyrian society. The message was simple but effective. Humanity remembered everything and forgave nothing. But the most chilling part of Karen's final broadcast was a direct address to any alien species that might be watching. Speaking in a voice devoid of emotion, she explained that Earth was now permanently hostile to any non-human visitors. Any alien ship that entered the solar system would be destroyed immediately, and any alien species that threatened humanity would face complete extinction as the last Zephyrian ships disappeared. From Earth's skies, the human survivors began the process of rebuilding their civilization. But the society they created would be based on principles that their ancestors would not have recognized. Strength was valued above compassion, efficiency above morality, and survival above everything else. Jake Morrison became the first leader of the new human government, a position he accepted not because he wanted power, but because someone needed to ensure that humanity would never again be vulnerable to alien invasion. His administration focused entirely on developing weapons and strategies that could destroy any potential threat before it could reach Earth. The victory over the Zephyrian Empire had taught humanity a valuable lesson about the nature of the universe. In a galaxy filled with predators, only the most ruthless species would survive. Humans had learned to be more ruthless than their enemies, and they would never forget that lesson. Years later, intercepted alien communications would reveal that Earth had gained a reputation throughout the galaxy as a world to be avoided at all costs. The humans were coming, and they remembered everything their enemies had taught them about war.